complexity, genetic complexity on individual differences or differences between species is still extremely primitive. We have only recently shown by the whole genome mapping that the number of genes in the mouse and the number of genes in our cells is virtually identical. So if you think there's a difference in complexity or level of biological organization between a mouse and a human being, I happen to, you're not going to find it in increased genetic complexity. It ain't there. Now, he wants to name me a beneficial mutation. I can name you hundreds, depending on the species or the context. In the case of bacteria, many mutations have appeared and spread in the face of antibiotics. They were not caused, as I've read Dr. Hogan assert somewhere, I believe, by the antibiotics. They were selected when the antibiotics appear. And as most of you must know now, the evolution of resistance to antibiotics is a major and growing problem in medicine. We now often have to hit the same disease that could have been killed with one antibiotic. We have to hit the individual with 3 different antibiotics, cut it in 3 different directions to kill the organism. Why? Because beneficial mutations have occurred from the standpoint of the bacteria, which conferred greater survival and reproduction in the face of the antibiotics. Bacteria are not trying, so to speak, to benefit our cells. Endless examples. A recurrent mutation in Australian blowflies, for example, it was kept at low numbers and been studied for a number of years. Australia has excellent genetics. And then suddenly along came a pesticide used against other creatures which happened to hit the blowfly, and lo and behold, this mutation just happened to give resistance to it. It increased very rapidly in frequency in 20 years until virtually every blowfly had it. And simultaneously, it was incorporated into the phenotype or the structure much more efficiently. So other genes had been selected for that counteracted its negative effects so that the organism could enjoy just its negative effects. I don't want to give more examples. They're endless. And it is a lie, if I may use the language of this character, to imply otherwise. Now, oh Lord. All right. There's a dreadful confusion. There's a dreadful confusion throughout his presentation between types of organisms, species of organisms, varieties within species, and so on. Darwin's finches, well, he thinks they all came from a common ancestor, but they're all a bird. Yeah, but they're all different species. They don't interbreed with each other, and the bird that they came from is sometime in the more distant past. Now, he says, you know, a dog's still a dog. Well, that's a great point. He says broccoli, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts are still a plant. He says you can't graft a tree onto a hippopotamus. I mean, what is that teaching us exactly? The fact of the matter is that evolutionary logic assumes that natural selection has a period of time to work before species are formed. And if in the short period of time that we have selectively bred plants, we can produce broccoli, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts, which are all in the same species, not just a plant, they're members of the same species, they interbreed, it is natural to wonder if 500 years, or 5,000 years, or 50,000 years of the same selection couldn't produce organisms way beyond interbreeding with each other, which is the origin of new species. Have we actually done this in real time? Yes, we have, it turns out. Busy beavers in their laboratory have bred fly species that no longer can interbreed with the original species from which they came, and which are, by definition, new species. They had to breed very specifically for traits that would cause isolation from species. So this is just sort of ridicule and verbal amusement, but has no contact with reality. 2 minutes? Okay, I'll just make 2 more points. He tells us that unless you can see evolution taking place, in other words, unless you can go back in a time capsule and actually sit there and watch it happen, and then fast forward a few hundred years, and then a few hundred more, and then see it, if you can't do that, then the whole thing's fantasy, you left time. That is not true. And if it were true, then an atomic bomb dropping on your head would be an example of a fairy tale that happened to turn out to be true. Atomic phenomena are not visualized and seen to the degree that he wants you to see scientific phenomena, but they're certainly a part of science. You cannot see a star being born because it takes, by any reasonable calculation, tens and hundreds of millions of years to take place, and you don't live that long. Now, he tells me at the outset, oh, he's going to give me these other kinds of evolution. He'll just concentrate on biological evolution as I wanted, but he hadn't given me nothing, because he still wants to start the Earth 4,000, 5,000 years ago, so he hadn't given me nothing. Those other disciplines say that the planet has existed about the universe 15,000 years, the planet 15 billion, the planet 5 billion. So nothing happened until 4,000 years ago, and then living creatures appeared all at once. Most implausible. The gill slit stuff is a little sideshow that I can get into later if you want. The immune system contribution to the appendix is grossly overrated. As for the notion that the whale, that you are looking at a vestigial pelvis there, that's not a fantasy completely. We have a fossil record. He tells us it's not a record, just a bunch of bones. We have bones of creatures, and they go downward in time, deeper and earlier sediments, also timed by timing mechanisms that are consistent, that show whale-like creatures with bigger pelvises, whale-like creatures with pelvises and limb bones, whale-like creatures, although less whale-like, with the actual bones sticking out in the flippers, and we even have lineages that strongly suggest which group they came from, which I think were cattle-like creatures, small cattle-like creatures. That's my response to what I've heard so far.
I'd like to find out from the audience, how many of you heard in the last 10 minutes him call upon time to be the savior of the theory, in that, well, of course we don't see it happen because it takes too long. Of course we don't see evolution happen because it takes, too long. How many of you caught that in the presentation? So in other words, we don't see it happen. Now that's what I said at the beginning. You have to imagine that evolution happened. It takes place in imagination. This is no different than a fairy tale for kids, long ago and far away. That's what evolution is. If you want to believe, well, it could happen if you have enough time, well, then go ahead and believe that. But see, science deals with things you can observe and test and demonstrate. Evolution is not science. It's a fairy tale for grown-ups. That's all it is. And many evolutionists have admitted that. I can't hit every point we have here, because these debates go for 20 hours and still not solved. Let me just pick one or two more. The fossil record. Evidence of evolution from the fossil record. This is silly. As I mentioned earlier, there is no fossil record. There are fossils. And I have a huge collection of fossils. I happen to like digging fossils. I went to Colorado 2 months ago digging up a dinosaur. There's no question. There are fossils. The question is, what do they mean? It's his interpretation he wants to put on the fossils. And I want to put an interpretation on the fossils. But the fact is, there is no fossil record. There are just fossils. Okay? It's evidence. This guy says evolution is a fact. The fossil record provides for the strongest evidence that species evolved over time. This is silly. There is no, you don't look back.